This is my studio. It's not a very big studio, but it is adequate. I can have up to 5 students at a time, and there are workstations for everyone. I've had 6, but it's a little crowded. So each student gets their workstation. All the tables are covered with metal. I find that's the easiest to clean up. And I use little pieces of ceramic tile to take the hot encaustic and put it right by the workstation of each student, or myself when I'm working alone. I use a regular griddle. I have 3 of them in here. I find that they work very, very well. I don't need anything more expensive than that. It is very, very important to have a thermostat so the encaustic paint does not overheat. In San Miguel, we have a very high altitude, and I find that I have to have the temperature set up to 250 degrees Fahrenheit. Otherwise, the paint simply does not get warm enough, get hot enough. And you can see, this is a very painterly griddle. I mentioned before, I am a painter, and that's how I use it. And it is not important for me to have to clean up the edges or care when students spill paint all over the sides. There's another workstation under the window, and you will see the fan. That's very important to keep the air circulating and the ventilation moving. I find that by having the temperature up this hot, it is not a problem, but as I mentioned, it must be on a thermostat. And you can tell if it's overheating. You can see like little portions of wax going into the air. And if that happens, you just want to shut everything off, get out of the studio, and make sure the fans are on. There are samples of my work around the studio. I like to keep them up here, particularly for students to ask questions about how they were done. I will share any of my techniques with anyone. And sometimes it's much better, though, to be able to see them, take them in your hands, view them up close, and say, Ashwan, how did you do that? I am basically a classically trained artist, so I move back and forth from abstract to figurative. And as you can see up in the walls, there's an example right there, a figurative right above the abstract. I do so enjoy working with the figure, and I enjoy the abstract also. I love the luminosity of the encaustic, the potential of looking deep into the painting instead of just at the surface. And then we see we have another fan over here. There are some stacked stools where the students come in and they can take notes and watch demos. And the occasionally used bucket of cold water in case we get hot encaustic on our hands. Just dip it in there, and then it peels off easily without burning. And there are some of my books. The latest one is Painting Portraits in Encaustic. And there are more samples you can see of the various ways I have worked over the years. I have worked for over 13 years, and I do keep changing. I work in series, and I usually have at least 12 paintings in each series. And on the door, you'll see the shoe bags here. I went on both sides, and it's great for storage. As I said, I don't have a very big studio, but I have every tool necessary. And here the students can help themselves to different sized brushes, of course all bristle brushes, and scissors, polishing cloths. And then up at the top I have chopsticks, which I like to use for stirring the paint when I make my own paint, or sharpening them and actually carving right into the encaustic. On this table, we'll see the setup for making the medium, the basis of everything. The small wax pellets, the beeswax, filtered wax, which is very easy to use and to measure. And I use a lot of the less expensive 1-pound blocks of filtered wax, because we use so much of the medium and paint in the classes that I have to make quite a bit at a time. And then, of course, we have the Damar resin. Without the resin, it isn't encaustic, and a hammer next to it. because I like to smash up the encaustic resin into more smaller pieces that will melt more readily. And then after it is cooked, I pour it into these molds, silicone molds, and I have different sizes of them because I like the blocks in different sizes. Sometimes when I just want to add some medium to a paint in a can, I simply just take one of these smaller ones. They don't always need the bigger ones. I found through my work that if I kept reheating the same big pot of encaustic, it kept getting darker and darker. And I like my medium to be very clear. Here are the old pots that I use for making the medium. My formula varies between 8 parts of medium to 1 part wax, or down to 6 parts of wax to 1 part of medium if I want a harder surface. I put a small amount of the wax into this old pot along with the full measure of medium and cook that until all the medium is completely dissolved. Then pour it into this pot, and of course it is all filtered with this paper filter. It's a paint filter. It's a heavy one. It is not a coffee filter, and you can see all the residue in there. We'll move on to the tools that I like to use. Some of my most favorite tools. I love the loops. I've got quite a few of those, and I do a lot of scraping. The spoons, of course, are used for the transfers. These are some of my favorite scraping tools. These are simply the clay tools. I cut and incise and scrape with these. There are stamps, wooden stamps, and rubber stamps, all various sizes and shapes and patterns. And these can be used to be stamped into the warm encaustic or with paint on top, putting in designs. The torch that I like the best is this one. For years I used the heat gun, and there were 2 reasons why I stopped using that. For the detail work, it did blow around too much, and it did not, it often burned out in our irregular Mexican electricity. I do like the RNF paints very, very much, as well as their paint sticks, although I make a lot of my own paint. You can see over here there are 3 layers of cans of different colors of paint so the students can have whatever they want. And of course we have extra cans here where you can mix up specialty colors. I use a lot of the RNF paint sticks, but I do have others also to add for the oil glazes, and I will be showing you some of that technique in the classes. Then we have, of course, the larger scrapers. Sometimes I use to scrape all the paint off and just start all over again. There is a wire brush for more mark making. And of course we have the chains to pound into the encaustic for texturing. The wooden tools I like. I can heat these and do some smoothing with that. I have several of the palette knives that I use, particularly the small ones like this, that I can heat on the palette and then use in the old-fashioned way of just heating the tool and moving the encaustic wax on the painting. There are many ways of working. Here are some more examples of my work. There is quite a bit of figurative along with the abstract. Here are examples of building and cutting with encaustic. Lots of texturing. So there are some examples of my work, my style, and we will start the classes and we will learn to do many of these things. Oh, that was terrible.